I just need you to help me understand why you feel like you need to do it this way. I just don't think this is the right move for you.
Excuse me?
There is a moment in the life of every expatriate when they realize that the most significant border they will cross is not the one marked on any map. It is the one that exists, inexplicably, between themselves and their own money. On a Tuesday morning in May, Miriam placed a phone call to her bank in America. The bank employed among its many staff a woman named, it doesn't matter what she was named.
Maybe your federal bank. May I help you?
What matters is that she had opinions, and opinions in the wrong hands are a surprisingly effective financial instrument.
But there was a deadline, a very important one, that almost didn't get met.
She had a southern accent. Let me explain. So, the apartment's still a hole in the ground. But the hole has hit a construction milestone, which means that the developer sends a document, which means that the stage 2 payment is due. There's a deadline. There's always a deadline. Ellie and I knew about it. We were expecting it. We had it on the calendar. We weren't surprised by it. But here's the thing about the timing. The money for this stage 2 payment was sitting in a CD, a certificate of deposit, which matures on a fixed date. And you don't get to negotiate with a certificate of deposit. It opens when it opens. And it was maturing the day before the payment was due. That portion of the money was from the sale of our U.S. property last year. And it's been sitting in their bank for a year. They know where it came from. It's been there the whole time. So I couldn't have done this earlier. It's not me being disorganized. It's just me being at the mercy of a financial instrument that operates on its own schedule. I didn't go into the branch. I did what I've always done. The one that they told me to use, the one that I always use. Their form, their system. I submitted it. I called as soon as they opened. First thing, before the wire cut off. Just to confirm that it would go out that day. And then she got on the line. I explained what I needed. It was even a domestic transfer. My account, my money, going to my other domestic U.S. account. So she looks at the screen and she looks at the form that I had already submitted. And then she looks at the screen again. And then she starts asking questions. Now I understand that the banks have to ask questions. I'm not opposed to questions. But these were specific kind of questions. The kind that suggest that she had already decided something and she was trying to build a case for it. Why do I need to move this money? Okay, they asked this question. Where is it going after I send it? What's it for? Had I been contacted by anyone recently to ask me to move money? Of course, those are all the standard questions. I know those. Passed with flying colors.
Why aren't you just sending the wire directly to the builder from this bank?
Now, the honest answer is because your exchange rates suck. Because your exchange rates are not competitive at all. And I would like to keep some of my money. That's the honest answer. I didn't say that. I wanted to, but I didn't say that. So I said, it's my other domestic account. I preferred to use it to manage my international payments. She was also not persuaded by this. Then she told me,
I see your U.S. address is on the form for the other bank. You said you live overseas. You need to change the address on the other bank, your Wise account, to your foreign address before I can do this.
That didn't sound right to me, because I have a U.S. address on the account. And apparently, to her, that was a problem. I said no, not because I was being difficult, but because Wise had specifically told me not to change it. I opened that account in the U.S., and because it was a U.S. account, it stays. They know where I am. Wise told me that changing my address to a foreign address on my main Wise account would block me from certain functionality, because then my account would totally be under the authority of the European Wise branch headquarters. As long as I maintained a U.S. address, I was fine, because I opened it in the U.S. Wise told me this, and I was following Wise's instructions about not changing the address, while a bank teller was explaining to me how my Wise account should be configured. For the record, I still have a domestic U.S. address, my daughter's property. The bank knows this, and they also know where I am. They have both addresses on file. So then she puts me on hold for 30 minutes. Literally, the timer was on. Then she came back and told me,
I have to ask my supervisor.
okay, tomorrow I have a payment to make today. The exchange rate is good today. I reminded her calmly that this bank, her bank, had already done this exact transaction twice before for the same project. No problems, no holds, no supervisors. And then I asked her, since she seemed so certain, why the other 2 times this bank had done this exact request. And then she said,
They shouldn't have.
what? She said that if it were up to her, she wouldn't have done it either. What? This is my money, mind you. My money in my account. Domestic. From one domestic bank to another domestic bank. And I also reminded her that those bank transfers were approved by the bank manager. She wasn't moved by this information. Then she asked again what was the address on my Wise account. I said, my U.S. address that I currently still have. Then she said, if you change your U.S. address on your Wise account to your foreign address, then I'll do it. And then I said, fine, let's just cancel this whole thing and start over with the new address. She said, no. I said, you just told me to do that. She said,
I misspoke.
Meanwhile, Ellie's on her phone, getting in contact with Wise. I misspoke. So Wise told us clearly, immediately, do not change your account address. It's a U.S. domestic account with a U.S. domestic well-known bank that the money's being transferred to, one of the banks that Wise uses in the U.S. Do not touch it. Even Wise was confused because they had received the other 2 previous payments. At this point, I realized there was nothing to do but get off the phone with this woman and try again later. She was pleased, and I was pissed. This is an annoying story with a deadline attached to it. Payment had a due date. That due date was not far away. I was sitting at home watching the clock while somewhere in America a woman processed her uncertainty about my life choices. I want to make it clear. She was being a jackass. The apartment had a due date, and these 2 facts were converging. So I went and did something else for a moment to regroup. I thought about the deadline. I thought about the hole in the ground. And then about an hour and a half later, the phone rings. It's the bank. A nice lady this time. No southern accent. Apologizing. She does all the security checks again. Says that everything checks out. Wire transfer processed. Then she asks, is there anything else she can help me with? Because of the time difference between the 2 countries, the hours between here and there, the wire still made it on time. We met the deadline by a margin that I would have preferred to have been wider, but we met it. Now, can we talk about Wise for a second? Because I think this part's really useful. When you're moving money between currencies, which is what my life involves now, constantly whether I like it or not, the exchange rate's not a small detail. It's not a rounding error. The difference between your bank's rate and the mid-market rate, it's real money. It adds up, especially when you're making stage payments on a property. So I use on my phone an alert that lets me know when the check quorum and the U.S. rate is up. It tells me when to do what I need to do. Wise gives you the mid-market rate. Your bank gives you their rate, which is the mid-market rate plus whatever they feel like adding on top of it. I'm not here to tell you what to do with your finances. I'm telling you that I've done this enough times now to have opinions. And my opinion is Wise. And if I do the transfer from my U.S. Wise account, which was set up in the States before I left, I transfer from my U.S. bank to a U.S. domestic Wise account. That way I don't have to deal with F-bars or anything because it's U.S. to U.S. And then I just let Wise send a transfer directly to the company. The woman at the bank, she didn't ask me about any of this. She was focused on other concerns, probably like why I would want to live in another country. Well, the stage 2 payment is in. The developer has it. The hole continues to be a hole. And, well, but it's a hole we have now paid for twice. Nobody told me that building a life somewhere would involve these particular set of obstacles. I imagine language barriers. I imagine bureaucracy. I imagine homesickness. But what I hadn't imagined was a bank teller in America as the primary antagonist. I'll keep you posted.